There.
Excellent.
We're recording. So, I guess I should do like an introduction-y kind of thing.
Okay.
As I suppose this is going on my channel.
Oh, dear.
So, what's up, Paisanos? This is Mickey Saturn, and I'm here with my good friend Alex York. And yes, say hello, Mr. York. And we're going to talk about virtual reality. Basically, the thing is that there are some topics that seem better suited for a discussion than just a lecturing the camera kind of a thing. And I felt like this was one of them, so that's what I decided to try to do. And maybe this will be a somewhat regular thing. You have already noticed, I guess, at this point, but I am the little guy in the corner. Because you see me talking all the time. And I have my guest all big and, full-sized on the screen. So yeah, I mean, this virtual reality is this topic. Of course, people have been talking about virtual reality for a long, long time, but recently it really seems like the technology is there, or it's going to be there like really soon. The Oculus Rift is coming out, and everyone that's tested one raves about it. Valve, we now know, is doing all kinds of interesting stuff with virtual reality as well, in cooperation with the Oculus company. There's increasingly, I'm starting to see pitches for like omnidirectional treadmills and things like that. There's a YouTube video that I saw and that I think has kind of made the rounds of a guy playing a modded Skyrim using an Oculus Rift headset and an omnidirectional treadmill and 2 Wii remotes. And he is running on the treadmill and looking around and shooting arrows with the Wii remotes. And it's so close to like the 80s movie version of what virtual reality is that essentially that version or that level of fidelity of virtual reality is technologically possible right now, and many people think it's going to be like a consumer product in the imminent future, and like Valve was saying by like 2015.
Right. So
to me, this is really an interesting claim, and there's a lot to discuss about that. What do you think?
What do I think? Wow. So weird. I've never done anything like this before on the internet, so I have to preface this video with that remark, I suppose. No, this is This has been an interesting trend to watch. Like, I always knew it was coming, Like, I remember as a child having these kinds of dreams and visions of, man, I wish I had, like, a device I could put on my head and then, like, come up with some kind of world or dream that I had and then give it to somebody else and they could experience it in a full experiential kind of way, Mm-hmm. I always thought that would be a really powerful thing for people to communicate with that sort of experiential quality. But, I don't know, I'm a bit trepidatious about it as an actual consumer product, I have to say.
Right.
It's been interesting to watch this stuff, though. I've heard a lot about the Oculus Rift, obviously, and with its Kickstarter the other year to do the development kits and everything. I knew, something big is coming. It reminds me a couple of years back when I saw John Carmack speak in Dallas.
Right.
And he was talking very enthusiastically about VR technology, and I remember at the time, he even told the whole crowd, it's like, yo, into my basement and sort of hold myself in for a few months with some Xbox, Kinect cameras and some computers and hacking them and figuring out how to do this kind of VR technology stuff. Like, he was going to actively start experimenting with that. And then a few months later, he's, like, endorsing the Oculus Rift.
Right.
And it's like, if you can get someone who, builds rockets in his spare time
yes,
and pioneered the development of 3D game programming to endorse your VR technology project, then I think you've got a winner there. So
yeah, and I mean, he works for them now,
Yeah, he works for them.
He quit. He left id to go work for Oculus. So id is dead. Oculus is the new it. Like, that's what that is. They need to get John Romero in there to make the Doom of VR. That
I could see what's happening.
That would be amazing. I mean, I guess, like, central partly to the question is it going to be as amazing as everyone says it's going to be? And that is a question that, in some ways, I guess neither of us really can answer because we've not used the device, so we don't have any first-hand knowledge. But there's a lot of testimonials from people that have used them who say that it's just unbelievable. And Valve, as I know we were talking about this briefly earlier, talks about this thing called presence, which is the way that VR fools your brain into accepting that this is actually real. And, according to Valve, it's a different feeling than the sense of immersion that you get from a normal 3D game. It's like this. It's much more visceral than that, apparently. It's much more feeling like you are really in this place. And is really uncanny. And, if it's as incredible as everyone says it will be, or can be, that's that's bound to be like a big deal,
Right.
But I still wonder if it's viable as a consumer product, because as I see it, basically, there are three big problems with VR as a consumer product. Okay, the first is it's not going to be cheap, at least not for a while. I mean, like the Rift. Okay, the Rift headset by itself is what, like $400, and that's a form of VR, you could say. But in my mind, you're not really at the level of what I would consider until you're also with the treadmill and all of that.
Yeah, so, that's like a full body kind of immersion thing.
Exactly. So the ultimate end state of the VR revolution is going to be one where you are like walking on either an omnidirectional treadmill or else around in like a room that's prepared, and Valve apparently has that working in prototype form. That's really interesting. But so, point being, the Oculus is $400. The omnidirectional treadmills are like similarly priced. I think they're like $300 to $400. All of this has to be it's outputting two images. That's how the VR is working. Two images into your eyes like this, and they have to be really HD. Like they have to be like 1440p HD. So your $400 treadmill and your $400 Rift have to be hooked up to a computer capable of outputting two 1440p images at greater than 60 frames per second resolution. So, I mean, I don't even know what that means, really. I mean, we're talking about, I guess, like $1,000 computer.
At least, yeah.
And then if you're talking about, peripherals like Wii remotes or something for, like, a hand, input, I don't even know what form that will ultimately take and what that will cost. But the point is, we're talking about like a $2,000, $2,500 setup. So that's a barrier. I mean, that limits it right there. And then this is going to take up a ton of space. And apart from the fact that not everyone's going to want to give a whole corner of their living room to this whole setup or whatever, I think a lot of people won't even have an option. Sure. In the kinds of tiny apartments that they're, pitching to people now, you just won't have space for this. Whereas you would have space for like a PS3 or something that can just sit under your television. So those are both, in my mind, pretty big concerns. I don't know. Am I wrong?
I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I think I could see it being something that starts out very cumbersome to the consumer like that, and very quickly gets to be something that's simpler. Like, I mean, that guy seems to be having a lot of fun on a little treadmill playing Skyrim, like, even in that. And that setup can't be more than, like, like a shower unit almost. with the treadmill and the headset and everything. And I think, although they have the computer set up right now, and certainly they talked about only using it when hooked up to a computer, I think within the next few years, I would very much assume that someone would take the dive to create like a fully independent Oculus Rift / setup, because I think one of the things you'll find is that they'll want to price software highly for these things too. Right. And so I think companies will want to create a system or a console basically where the software will have to be sold separately and inexpensively. I mean, not saying that that's necessarily the outcome, but I think that's one of the outcomes. I mean, technology, obviously, the makeup of it are the technological advances go very quickly, and so I think packing enough, processors into a small enough unit to wear on your head or on your backpack, you could wear like a backpack unit that does all the processing and everything, and then like the head unit, and then like a treadmill or something like that, and the backpack has controllers. I mean, very 80s there, but I think that could
no,
work.
but I totally can see that, like a Ghostbuster.
VR Ghostbuster machine.
No, that's a really great point, because you're totally right. Like, inevitably, it's all going to get integrated into like one device. You know? And the other good thing about VR that's not true of devices that aren't literally strapped to your body is that you don't need that much space. So like you could, in theory, like convert your closet or something into like a VR space, because while you could not put a television in your closet and sit in there and watch it, since the VR thing is on your head, if there's space to stand, that's all you need. So you're right. I mean, conceivably, there would be workarounds like that. Especially once you're not tethered to a computer. And no doubt that will inevitably happen eventually. So that's very interesting. I just need to wonder, I mean, I have other questions as well. Questions like, how this interfaces with the kind of culture of gaming and like what we do with games, right? I mean, like, for me, I play games generally as they're sort of like a mental exercise in a sense, but they're also like a way to kind of relax at the end of the day. So like running around on a treadmill is in a sense just antithetical to what I even want from a game. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I wonder how many people ultimately will feel that way. But then again, maybe it doesn't have to be that energetic. Conceivably, you could have kind of low-key adventure games where you do just kind of stroll leisurely, through the game world. But that's sort of my third point of a potential drawback to VR, and it's in a sense it's a more substantial point, which is that it seems to me like VR is fundamentally limited in terms of the sorts of gameplay that it will allow. Obviously, in order to work, it has to be viewed in a first-person manner. So you're only looking at first-person gameplay. And then if you just think about all the gameplay types that don't really translate to first-person very well,
what are you thinking of specifically here?
Like action games. Basically, I guess mainly it's like games with melee combat that seem to me like, traditionally first-person melee has been an issue. Would that still be true in a VR setting? Maybe it wouldn't, because your actual depth perception would be helping you gauge,
Right.
But fighting games, anything where you're kind of managing a group, like a JRPG style game, just wouldn't work. You couldn't manage more than one person, I wouldn't expect. I mean, I guess you could perhaps via just like menus, but a game like StarCraft, for example, an aerial view, not just presentationally speaking, but also like conceptually. It's like if you're kind of the general looking down at the troops or something, then the VR is in a sense just conceptually not applicable to that, perhaps?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's something where you could still wire it through the screen. Like, I think you could probably still wear, like, an Oculus Rift and sit down and play StarCraft.
Right.
I mean, I've not actually ever played StarCraft, so I can't really talk about that in depth. But from what I understand about that or any other kind of strategy game of that level, you're switching viewpoints and switching through menus and stuff like that. And so you could just do that. It's just that it would be, like, right up in your face.
Right,
like
right.
But it might be a more concentrated experience in that sense. Like, it would certainly be sort of disembodied, I would think, for that to, like, take up the fullness of your visual space, and you're only, interacting via, like, a keyboard or something, or controllers or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess at that level, I would say that's perhaps not VR anymore, right? I don't know. This is like a semantic discussion at a certain point. But it's true that, like, certainly you could use the Oculus as just a slightly different version of a normal computer screen. And people are doing that, supposedly. Like, people have hacked Windows. People with Oculus, like, dev kits and stuff have, like, hacked Windows so that, they're doing their word processing in 3D or whatever, with the headset and stuff like that. And, like, I guess all the different windows or whatever are, like, separated spatially, so they seem to, like, pop forward. And that's part of what they're doing with it. You could obviously do that, but that, I don't know, to me, I wouldn't call that VR. I mean, the idea of VR is that it's like a one-to-one movement, mapped to your body.
Your body.
So it's like being a VR version of StarCraft would have to put you in, like, the general's room, get like a holographic table or something, and there could be like a sergeant standing beside you who's, like, talking to you or something, I don't know, like that. You could still imagine that, like, you could make a VR experience around any activity, but it just seems like it's not that applicable in a lot of cases, and this is where I wonder if I'm making assumptions that aren't relevant, or that aren't actually correct, I should say. Because one assumption that I do have is that it's basically that anything that you could do in real life, it would be better to do in real life, right, than to do in VR. So, like, a fighting game doesn't make sense in VR. Just, even if you could make it work somehow from, like, a presentational perspective, it just doesn't make sense, because it would not be any easier than than actually becoming a martial artist, and that would be cooler. Yeah. So why would you play a VR martial arts game?
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I mean, I think one thing about that assumption is that people, aren't as logical, I think, as we would all like each other to be, basically. Like, sure, maybe that's, why don't you just get up and go join a dojo and become a martial artist? But, or you can, like, put on this VR headset and pretend like you're Goku and fight against Piccolo and Vegeta and all this stuff, and,
yeah.
And visually, just that visual system, as that article was saying, or even, I think it might have been Valve's internal documents or whatever those documents were talking about, like, just that fooling your reptile brain, as it were, and so making the experience that much more sort of, like, shocking to your system, or, like, that much more visceral, maybe, for your imagination. I mean, I guess what I wonder about is, like, the feedback from something like that. So, like, how do you do feedback from a fighting game? Right. And is something else, like, actually punching you, or, like, is it just all imagined? Do you wear a bodysuit that, like, inflicts little bits of, like, electrostatic shock where, when you get punched, supposedly?
I could see that.
But I know what you mean. Like, for instance, like, if you're playing an exploration game or something like that, or even the guy playing Skyrim, say you're playing Skyrim, like, you're navigating all kinds of different terrain, but if you're just, like, on a treadmill or something, then you're just, like, your feet are just going along the same even surface, even though in game or in experience, you should be like ascending planes and descending planes and going over uneven territory. What about, like, you know, stepping on the rocks or whatever? Like, it's not having the fullness of that, but I guess that's what they were talking about, taking that presence, like whatever it takes to convince yourself of that presence.
Right.
You know, how do you get that?
I think, I mean, one thing I keep coming back to is, in a traditional video game, I think part of why they're fun, I've thought so for a long time, is that they take things that are either impossible or else extremely difficult, and they make them easy because they map them to like a button. So it's like, you know, throwing a football with a professional quarterback's level of accuracy is a button press in Madden. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And, you know, doing like a excellent roundhouse kick is like a button in Street Fighter. But in virtual reality, the movements, I think it would be possible to exaggerate in-game what you actually did a little bit, but not too much, or else there would be this weird disconnect. So executing a roundhouse kick in VR would require you to actually do a roundhouse kick or something, you know? And things that are like really crazy, like in Devil May Cry, for example, where Dante is able to, you know, do these long aerial combos and stuff like that, where he's like floating in the air. It's like, I don't know that you can do that in VR. I mean, apart from the question of could you present that kind of gameplay in first person, you might be able to figure that out. But it's like the physically experiencing and what you're, would like break that whole presence quality, right?
Yeah. I don't know, like that works in terms of gameplay when you're just sitting on the couch and pressing buttons, I mean, but that's just because it's a conceptual connect, right? Like you're just sort of conceptually putting yourself in the game at some level, like playing Street Fighter, you know, playing against another person, like you're not actually throwing punches, but you feel, you know, maybe if you get into the game you really feel energetic about it, and so you know, when you're pressing the fierce button, it's like you're like really ha 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 ha, you know, kind of attacking. But I don't know, but if it's yeah, you're right, I don't know what that disconnect would be like if, you know, you're having to do the same thing in life to get it exactly to a one-on-one in terms of virtual reality. I mean, I think there'll probably still be some disconnect, but just maybe the visual element itself will connect well enough for people.
Yeah, maybe. I can see ways that elements of it could work to your advantage. Like for example, when you mentioned pretending you're in Dragon Ball Z or something. Yeah. So that makes sense, right? Like that's a reason that you might want to do that, because as opposed to going and being a real martial artist is what I mean. Because even though, you know, you're standing there punching and, you know, and all of this, and that's in essence not any different than if you went to actually train or something, you know, it's draped in this fantasy veneer that's maybe more compelling, and you could see how certain actions could be replicated via miming, like a Kamehameha. You could actually do that, because that doesn't require you to fly or anything insane. So, you know, you could do the motion for that, and you know, and if the sound and the sights are telling you that you're actually throwing a fireball when you do that, that might be kind of amazing, you know. But, yeah. But what I think maybe is going to be the case is that what we're going to find is that most of that doesn't work very well, and that I think VR games are mostly going to be either games where you're in a vehicle and that's able to be like the rationalization for the disconnect. So you could be like in a plane or like in a car, or maybe you could even be in like a big mech or something like that, and that way there's like a fiction supporting the idea that you're sitting in a chair or something, but it can still seem very realistic. So there's going to be that, and I think other than that, I think it's going to be a lot of games where it's going to be almost like old point-and-click adventure games or something, where you kind of just walk around and do very kind of low-key interactions. But if the sense of presence that Valve is talking about is extremely strong, that could still be really amazing and compelling.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder, this makes me think a lot of Guitar Hero, and sort of how that, emulates playing guitar. I mean, it's really nothing like playing guitar. I mean, other than that your hands are doing something, in a similar position. But it's truly nothing like it, right?
But for the most part, yeah.
But it's like with but just having that little plastic guitar, and then having those little buttons to press, and having a little thing to kind of flick back and forth. I mean, there's something that's very like the feedback about it is nice, or is compelling enough, and then just watching the little notes drop towards you, almost like almost like Tetris or something, like just this little candied, glowy things that you're exploding by pressing these little buttons and doing this little thing, and having the music playing at the same time. It all just sort of coordinates, and suddenly you feel like you're in control and playing guitar. And I think it'll be something similar for VR technology. I think obviously one of the things they'll try and emulate first is a lot of first-person shooter games.
Right.
And I think those will probably actually emulate fairly well, because it's first person, and if you can get the sort of the aiming, and maybe using, I don't know if you're using a gun type
peripheral
controller or peripheral.
Saying about Guitar Hero made me think about that. I was kind of thinking this already when I was thinking about a racing game in VR. It might turn out to be the case that for maximum effect anyway, you will want all of these specific peripherals. I was thinking to myself, you could play a racing game with the Oculus Rift, where you're sitting down and you've got your controller in your hand, and you can look around. So it's you can look at the interior of your car, which in the modern racing games they model the interior to incredibly high degree, which is interesting. And you can drive the car. But I was thinking to myself, would that be, even that might be a little strange in a way, because you're seeing your hands on the wheel in front of you, presumably. Or at least if you're in virtual reality and you're able to look around, you have to be able to see your body. They can't have you in virtual reality and you're just a floating camera, because that would be way too.
Jarring.
Yes. So it's every way in which the digital avatar of your body isn't matching up to your actual body is potentially a problem. But if they had an arcade racing setup almost, where your feet are on pedals and your hands are on an actual steering wheel, then even if the pedals and the wheel that you're actually holding aren't exactly the same as the one you're seeing, the relative similarity might be sufficient. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what if it turns out to be something like that, where you kind of need a bunch of different peripherals that are specific to the genre of game that you're playing? That I could see that being, part of it, maybe.
Something else that I wonder. I mean, you were just saying, you think it would be hard to make a game where you're just a floating camera or something like that. But I wonder about something like that. I mean, there have been past games with the sort of God simulator, Populous and other games, but with something like the Oculus, that's a little bit more fundamentally experientially real, maybe. I don't know, maybe you could have a game where you sort of form planets and ecosystems and organisms grow up on them, even human cultures or whatever, and then you could sort of go around and maybe you're sort of non-corporeal,
Yeah.
But you influence everything that happens, and you can this way breed civilizations, or like affect events in these giant geopolitical systems by influencing key persons in them. Of course, this would obviously take incredible amounts of programming and time and development,
Sure.
and maybe incredibly expensive. But I think something like that could be a very compelling and interesting game experience in a VR sense.
Yeah, that's interesting, because, I don't know, maybe you're right. Like, maybe you don't need to have an in-game presence in a way. Maybe you could be almost like a ghost in a sense, or something. Like, that's something to think about, because I had been, one of the things I had been thinking about was, unless they eventually make like a full body haptic suit or something, how will they, how will they be able to reliably estimate the position of your body?
Right.
And you can imagine how if you're walking on a treadmill, they could do that, right? Like, the way that you're walking on the treadmill could give them a good way to guess where your legs are. And if you had something in your hands that were kind of like Wii remotes or something like that, then they could know approximately where your hands are, and they know where your helmet is, and between the two, they could even probably figure out other stuff like how tall you are and stuff like that. So I imagine that, as long as you're not taking any really extreme actions, they actually probably can estimate a relatively approximate, close enough to fool you when you're in the VR environment, estimation of where your body. But if they don't even, maybe that's not that important. I don't know. That's where, I guess we'll ultimately have to try one to know how big a deal that is.
Sure.
And I was thinking, and this is something I've been thinking about anyway, even when I was earlier talking about, are they going to be too big for people's houses, or, too big for what people are going to want for their house and stuff. And then I kind of thought about it again when I was saying, if you had like an arcade racing setup or something. I wonder if maybe one area in which we might see VR, maybe initially even, well, I don't know if initially, the Oculus Rift is coming out so soon, and that's already going straight to consumers, but I wonder if there's sort of an arcade element to this, where it makes sense to have like a fully built machine, with like an Oculus Rift headset, but it's like the machine, is built to like reinforce the software that's on the Rift or something.
Sure.
And that alleviates some of those other problems. And I was also wondering if, or just, any other sort of public space in which, if you think about it, there are all these potential applications for this that aren't even games. Like running on a treadmill, people do that for exercise, and if you could use a headset to kind of gamify that in some way, or make that, experientially interesting, that could be neat. You go to the gym to run on a treadmill, and you put on the headset, and in the world of the headset, you're being chased by a T-Rex, like in Jurassic Park.
That would make you exercise, I suppose.
That's what I'm saying.
I was thinking more of like, calming, like the mountain forest kind of thing in the morning light, but no.
You know what? There can be like a selector, like a switch. I'm running along a beautiful beach. I'm fleeing a T-Rex. I'm going through a mystical forest. I'm fleeing a cascading wall of lava. The giant boulder is rolling after me, and or what about like in an educational context?
Sure.
You could take
driving schools could use that.
That's an interesting thought. I was thinking, what about like history classes and things like that? What if you could build like, what if like okay, Ubisoft for Assassin's Creed makes these extremely detailed renderings of these historical cities.
Yeah.
I mean, what if you could just walk around them as like a class or something while your professor lectures you?
That would be pretty cool, I have to say.
Florentine artists or something like that. Yeah,
basically.
Yes. I mean, that's. And it seems like those are contexts in which some of the other problems that might hold it back from being a full consumer product right away just kind of become negligible, you know.
Sure.
And maybe that's the first form in which we'll see that more fully immersive type of VR. I don't know.
No, I can definitely see that in educational contexts and museum contexts, you know, in driving schools and military contexts. For sure.
Military, for sure.
I
bet they already have it. I bet in the military.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's like 10 years old there, but you know, most anything. I think you could see that. I think you could see that. I could definitely see that in arcades.
Yeah,
I definitely see that coming. You know, any arcade is probably trying to find new ways to get people to come in, and having a VR machine or something would be an excellent way, and also a good way to introduce the public to something like the Oculus Rift or VR technology to date. You know, I think it would be like a popularization, because I think, you know, obviously in the gaming community, like, people are watching the Oculus Rift, but in the wider public, you know, people aren't so familiar with this, you know, like, I think that would be a good way to introduce people, or even like just, you know, having, you know, the around the holiday season, like here in Vancouver at Metrotown, they had like a big booth for their Wii U titles and stuff, and people would come in and play them. You know, you could see a bunch of parents walking their children in, and children are like, you know, super excited about it, and they're like, oh, maybe we should get a Wii U or whatever. And, you know, I could definitely see, you know, the Oculus Rift doing something like that. People walking in and trying that.
Yeah. No, yeah, those are good points. Like, it is easy as someone that follows gaming news really closely to lose sight of how visible these things are or are not to the public. Like, I am continually shocked when I see, you know, quantification of the phenomenon of how many people still don't understand that the Wii U exists. It exists and is not just a peripheral for the Wii and all this stuff. And it's like, I cannot believe it. It's like, how could they not know this? But, you know, they don't. It's like there's this whole world of people who don't go to... Yeah, it's like they don't... It's like they don't even go to IGN at all.
Actually, I don't really go to IGN that much anymore.
Well, I mean, that's because we've graduated to the even higher level of...
Gamma Sutra, no.
Gamma Sutra, that's right. I want to give a plug to Destructoid. Sup, Destructoid? No, I like Destructoid a lot, but, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I was going to mention, like, this is a little bit off subject from what we were just talking about, but, you know, I think something that we're not really talking much about is other contexts for VR, or we were just talking about that with museums and, you know, education, all that kind of stuff. But I wonder about, like, information infrastructure, like you were talking about people hacking Windows with the Oculus Rift and using that as like a 3D setup. Like, what if you started to integrate that just in general information storage? Like, you know, I find it much easier when I sort of have things physically around me that I can organize. You know, like I can organize books on a bookshelf, and I find that more appealing and easy than like organizing files on a computer screen. So what if your file management system, as opposed to like using Finder on a Mac or, you know, Windows Explorer or whatever on a PC, what if you like just put on the Oculus head, you know, Rift, and you like walk into this little library thing, and you've got like all your files and, you know, books and videos like set up on a little virtual living room basically, or whatever, like on shelves and stuff, and you just kind of move them around and you put them on the table and you open one up and move things around. Like, I think that could be something that we see, like just your computer becomes its own little gamified information world. You know, it's like you put it on and suddenly your computer desktop isn't like just this flat screen. It's like this little, you know, like nice cottage with a little fire burning in the side, and you've got, you know, this like perfect, you know, daylight or whatever, or lamp coming onto your desk, and you like
T-Rex.
take out your T-Rex, T-Rex skull up there or whatever. Like, yeah, you could decorate it like your own little treehouse world. I mean, something really charming. And I think that's a context that the Oculus Rift could be used in and appeal to everyone. Like, I think
you're right.
That's a huge setup. You know, stuff.
That is a great point that I hadn't even really fully thought about. I mean, if I walked into a room and it was like a representation of all of my files, that would probably just be horrifying and overwhelming. So it's like Oculus takes my desktop and conceptualizes it as some kind of 3D filing system, and it's like stuff's just all over the floor, and there's like shelves tipped over, and yeah, I mean, and you know, I do think that, yeah, there's stuff like that that's just, these are the ways in which VR has the potential to become this thing that's not even just about gaming, but is just this constant, endless part of your life, from like as soon as you wake up until as soon as you go to sleep.
Right.
And, you know, yeah, and what does that mean? Like, so that leads us to, like, I mean, the kind of final topic is, so do we even want that?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's inevitable. Like, I think there's nothing we can do. Just the question of whether you use it or not. Just as a precursor note to this whole discussion, something that I'm greatly concerned about and wondering about is how well your eyes will work with this, like
eye fatigue,
exposure, eye fatigue. Like, I mean, I work in the animation industry, and I work on a webcam Cintiq all day. Basically, I sit there and I draw on it, and you know, I like my job. I like my job a lot, but I think, you know, one thing that's a common problem in the animation industry is like eye fatigue.
Right.
And, you know, some people end up having really heinous problems with that. Like, you know, I remember reading an article about a storyboard artist who, after like 20 years in the industry and using a Cintiq for like 10 of those, it's like the lens in her eye started to separate from the rest of the eye just because of like the intense eye strain and the what's it called? I guess the just the level of, not radiation. What am I looking for? I can't even think of it.
I don't know, like the intensity,
the kind of light that it uses, that computer screens utilize.
Right.
Like, it's not really light that your eyes should be looking at.
Yeah,
it's
that blue light, right? That they tell you not to look at so much.
Yeah, like there are special computer glasses you can wear that have like the kind of yellow tints or whatever to help reduce that effect and help stop it from hurting your eyes. But you know, I don't know if the Oculus Rift comes with something like that already embedded that sort of helps block that kind of lights. But
it's an interesting point.
I don't know. I just wonder, like, having TV screens strapped to your eyelids for 24 hours a day or whatever, it's going to kill them pretty bad, I think, pretty quickly.
And I don't know, like, when I start thinking about a future where everyone's using VR all the time for all kinds of stuff, then I think to myself, well, you know, one of the side effects of that future is that the environment that you're actually in becomes increasingly irrelevant.
Right.
So doesn't this mean that, like, everything can be smaller and kind of starker, you know? Like, I mean, I wonder if, like, 20 years in the future, will people be living in, like, 12 by 12 foot apartments that are completely featureless and have, like, one bed and, like, a chair to sit in while using your VR, and that's it? Because it's like, what else would you want, you know?
Modern design, chic kind of stuff, yeah.
And I mean, is that what like office buildings and stuff will look like? You know, like cubicles will just be like, you know,
Sure.
4x4 foot closets with, you know, a headset that you wear, you know,
Sure.
so you can feel like you're in an open space. You know?
Why would you even go to work though? Like if you can just like
That's
connect
true.
on your Oculus Rift on the, you know.
Who needs an office building anymore?
Yeah.
That's,
You
you're
just
right.
like go to work in your little Oculus world. I mean, maybe there's a building, an office in the VR world where you walk up and
There you go. I'm gonna make a
You have, like,
VR
virtual
office
coffee,
building.
you know?
It's gonna have like a water cooler and gray cubicles, and everyone's
Yeah,
gonna.
even though have, like the ceiling tiles and stuff.
There's gonna be like,
VR tie.
oh man, there's gonna be like a fluorescent light, and there'll be like a dang fly trapped in there, like buzzing around.
Oh gosh.
Since I don't want my employees to feel like they're in too good a place, I'm going to put some VR cockroaches down on the lower floors. That'll give them motivation to work hard so they can get up to the higher level VR offices where we take out the VR cockroaches.
I really don't know what to expect with that kind of technology being integrated into the workforce, or just being integrated at all into society. I mean, like,
Sure.
you know, obviously in the gaming world, you know, I think it's still a big deal, but I think, you know, World of Warcraft, I feel like I've not kept track of it. I don't know if it's like reached its peak and then declined, or if it's still like just like at a pretty, you know,
it started
solid flow.
I think it started to decline. They've been losing to now. It's still
But,
really
yeah.
huge, though.
But yeah, but people play it for hours on end, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
I was playing those games, right? I mean, like, wasn't there an
Yeah.
issue with that? Someone playing
There've
that?
been a few,
for
and people kill each other over the game because it's like the game is like this strange parallel reality.
Wow.
Like, there's cases of people like owing other people money in the game, and they come to their actual house, you know, and beat them and things like that, you know.
That's insane.
And there was a case of a guy in Denmark who, I'm trying to remember the story. I think Denmark is the country, so I think I'm right about that. And the story is that these guys that knew him through Warcraft, I guess, or I'm not sure if that's the only place they knew him from, but they showed up at his house and they like beat him up, and then they coerced him under threat of death, I guess, to transfer all of his possessions in Warcraft to their characters. So he goes into Warcraft and he logs in and he gives them all his stuff. And then they leave. Well, he called the police, and the guys got arrested, and what they got arrested for was, you know, kidnapping and false imprisonment or whatever. But they also got arrested for theft, which is interesting because the Denmark... Yes, it is like a precedent because the judge decided to regard his Warcraft property as real property that he owned and that they stole from him, which is funny because it's like a direct violation of like the user license agreement, which regards all of that as Blizzard's property. And it's Blizzard's property now and it's Blizzard's property later, so it didn't change hands at all, you know, as far as Blizzard's concerned. But so you could see how in the future, you know,
sure.
And you think of like digital currency like Bitcoin, and I don't know. I mean, for God's sakes, Ghost in the Shell. That's all. It's like there's one science fiction story to rule them all. And
that is true. That one is coming faster than I would like it to come. Gosh, I don't know. I have this weird feeling like we'll just see thousands of people literally vanish into the rift. With this, like, literally into the rift. Like,
that's so awesome. That's what it'll be called. It'll be called the Rift. That'll be the name for the VR world. That's awesome.
I was thinking it from, you know,
I know.
No, it's coming. I mean, like people get addicted to World of Warcraft now. I mean, think of when they can strap that headset on and forget everything else around them and play that until they like die of fatigue, or they play it, then they go to sleep in it, and they wake up in it, and they keep on playing it. And I mean, I think it'll be horribly addictive.
I was about to say,
it'll be drug level kind of addiction. Like, this is what you might see out of this.
Yeah, I was about to say there's already a story of people falling asleep with their Oculus Rift headsets on, and supposedly it's extremely disorienting. But you can forget you're wearing it. And the thing is, okay, so the Rift, it covers your eyes, but it also covers your ears, as it has the surround sound. So one of the things I was hearing, Chris Kohler, I think it was, on the Game Life podcast, which I really like that podcast, so everyone should check that out, is he mentioned, the fact that, people are going to get hurt, walking up to their relatives who are using the Rift and tapping them on the shoulder or something like that. People are just going to be like,
Totally.
And so they were saying, the Rift is going to need to come with, a interrupt button. You're going to have to, you don't have to go to, the people in your house, and you're going to have to say, I'm putting on the Rift now. If you need me, press this button. Don't touch me, because I will freak out. And they press the button and it'll go with maybe flash red, it lights in front of your face, it'll say real world calling. Remove the Oculus Rift.
Yeah,
because there's no way, it's you get totally sealed off from reality.
Experientially, and for its potential applications, I think we may see those in, I could see that both in use in trauma centers, maybe helping people over certain things. But I think you could also see people, in high security prisons being put in Oculus Rift kind of VR things, or coercing things out of people, and Guantanamo Bay using VR technology. I don't know. I could see.
VR technology,
or people putting people in those kinds of situations, almost Saw-like, but VR-like. I don't know. And this is all extreme, but I think it's potentially it's possible. It's possible. You're making it possible right now.
And when you get to the point where the VR tech is of the sort where you kind of walk around.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole other thing that's coming, supposedly, maybe a true holodeck. I mean, that could be actually dangerous. It seems to be, and not just. I mean, I could see how hackers or just malware type programmers could manipulate that and cause people to injure themselves and stuff just for their amusement.
I think of that too. I wonder about psychological damage that could be done to people via hacking into their Oculus Rift or into their games or whatever.
Have you read Snow Crash?
No.
Well, Snow Crash.
No, I don't want to look.
That's Snow Crash. Okay, crash course in Snow Crash. It's just this cyberpunk sci-fi novel in a future where there's this kind of VR type world, and this hacker creates this virus that when you expose to people in the VR world, it causes them to go into a coma in real life, and it becomes this huge problem.
Sure.
Anyway, and all kinds of other stuff happens. It's a really crazy book, but
I can see that. I can see that happening right now.
Yeah, it's supposedly it's this. It's like a snow pattern, like a snowy television screen kind of a thing, but it's a certain type of pattern that overloads you somehow if you see it. And I don't know about that exact thing happening, but I could see how nevertheless there's something kind of like that, some combination of sensory overload that could just kind of overwhelm you and do something to you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a interesting phenomenon, and I mean, it has all kinds of weird implications. I don't know. I mean, how does it impact human interaction, if at all? I mean, you might think to yourself, well, the one thing that won't change is that people will still want to interact with each other. I don't know. But maybe it will. I mean, speaking of secondary uses of VR technology, pornography is just obviously an application of that. Like an obvious one. And I'm sure they will be one of the first industries to completely use it. Like they will be right there. And I wonder if there will be increasingly, people who are just satisfied with that, and I don't know.
I think what strikes me is that VR technology seems to me to have the highest potential for the highest kind of what's the right word? Highest addiction rate, almost. Like, video games, like, it's supposed to be this thing where you can sort of jump into another world or whatever, or have different experiences people talk about. I mean, I don't particularly have that all the time. Like, I play more for form's sake, I guess, and for, classic gaming kind of adventure. But people already talk about, Skyrim or whatever as being like this experience of a different world. Or experiencing storylines or whatever. And people obviously read books and watch movies because they're being engaged with, other stories, with these stories that are potentially, or, to better themselves as human beings, as Roger Ebert said sometimes. But I think there's a little bit of escapist in everyone. Everyone wants to escape at some points from their own lives and live a fantasy, and I think VR technology provides that in a very real way for everyone. Like, video game consoles to this point haven't offered that to everyone. Not everyone's been really impressed with that.
Right.
But I think once you can put a headset on and change your complete sensory input to something completely different, then you can get almost anyone to try that, and almost anyone could get potentially hooked with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, and so that, I guess that leads me to my final thought, really, I guess, which is, it just seems to me like VR, like to characterize VR as sort of like an evolution of the video game is maybe just kind of not correct. It's almost like a completely different media enterprise. And while it obviously has certain similarities with the video game, and it might kind of consume the video game in a sense, I think it's not really the same thing. I mean, I wonder if in the future there won't actually be some kind of like a separation of like VR and certain types of games that are going for a VR-like experience right now kind of go into VR, but things like the game Street Fighter and the things that people play at like Evo and stuff maybe just don't ever go that way, and they stay what they are, I mean, you might still experience them via a headset if that's the new version of a monitor or something, but you might still though play them with a controller, and they might be presented, in much the same way that they are now. In a way, I mean, I wonder about that. It certainly seems to me like I feel like that's probably what will probably happen, is that there will still be a demand for what I think of anyway as the kind of more traditional kind of gamey type of game, but the super immersive 3D environment, games that have, gradually come to dominate it seems like they'll probably move towards the VR direction, I guess.
Yeah. I guess kind of my final feeling is like, I think obviously the VR stuff is coming. Oculus Rift is coming in the next couple of years. Games will be its first kind of application in a large social sense. But I think even those will take a few years to really catch on, or to really convince people. And I think it will take a few more years, maybe even another decade, for people to catch up in terms of software development, or even like thought process with like how do you approach VR interactions. And I think at that point, eventually, society will change in large. Maybe in the next 10 years due to VR technology. That would be my bet. I don't know how thorough or how extreme that change will be, but yeah. So,
Yep. I think so. Well, it'll be interesting anyway, and it won't be whether or not our more dark predictions come true, it won't be all bad,
right.
Any way you look at it. So there's at least some positive, interesting stuff to look forward to no matter what. And maybe there's only positive, interesting stuff to look forward to. Wouldn't that be nice for a change? So good discussion. We talked for an hour.
Excellent.
And that is much longer than I was planning, and so I'll either edit most of this away or I'll break it into parts, which is probably what I'll try to do, because I feel like we actually had I don't think there were a lot of places where it lagged or went off in random directions. Right. Success. We should do this more often. Paisanos, thanks for watching. Do all the stuff everyone tells you to do, like and subscribe and blah blah blah. Anyway, until next time.
Thanks.